Ride the signal through the unknown. This is the cryptic current.
The crushing pressure of the ocean began to collapse the steel walls inward, groaning like a dying beast. Michael Thorne could taste the metallic tang of rust mixed with the salt water that now pooled around his ankles. Every breath was a struggle against the thickening, ozone-charged air that burned his lungs. Then, from the absolute darkness beyond the failing emergency lights, a slow, wet, scraping sound began. It wasn't the sound of metal. It was organic, fleshy, dragging itself toward him. A primal, gut-deep terror seized him, rooting him to the spot as the temperature plummeted. The scraping stopped. In its place, a whisper, so close it felt like a breath on his neck. It spoke a single word, his name, in the voice of a man he knew had died down here 3 days prior. In the world's largest submarine graveyard, these aren't ships waiting for rescue. A flickering flashlight beam cuts through the gloom, illuminating a rusted control panel where seawater drips like a slow, metallic heartbeat. The air hangs thick with the scent of rust and brine, a metallic tang that coats the back of your throat. Then, from the shadows, a single bloodshot eye stares back, unblinking, as if it's been waiting. This is the story of what the deep and the dead can do to a living mind, and why, when they finally pulled him out, they almost wished they hadn't. The air was thick with the smell of salt and rot, a damp chill that seeped into the bones. Somewhere below, in the darkness, something was whispering. Cut to a warm, noisy pub interior. Michael Thorne was a salvage expert, the best in the business. A quiet, methodical man from Bristol, he could read the groan of metal like a doctor reads a heartbeat. His crew, Sarah, his no-nonsense dive coordinator, and Mike, his best mate and lead diver, were family. They were the only ones he trusted when the water turned black and the world above vanished. Their most ambitious job yet, the K-114. A Cold War Leviathan scuttled off the Scottish coast in a designated submarine graveyard. Their target was a secure forward compartment rumored to contain pristine, vintage guidance systems. $1 million payday. All they had to do was cut through the hull, retrieve the systems, and escape the crushing depths. But within that steel tomb, the air carried the metallic scent of decay and the oppressive chill of decades-old secrets. A 3-day operation, max. The salvage ship, the Marlin, pitched against the gray, heaving ocean. The crew moved with practiced efficiency, their spirits high as they prepared their gear. Sarah, a faint smile touching her lips, traced a line on the nautical chart with her finger. In and out, Mikey, like a bank holiday weekend, she said, her voice a mix of optimism and command. Nearby, Michael didn't look up, his focus absolute, as he calibrated the powerful beam of an underwater torch. Just watch the pressure, he replied, his voice low and edged with a quiet tension that belied the crew's casual mood. The first sign wasn't a sound, but a smell. The thick, metallic scent of rust and rot saturating the water around the derelict's hull. Michael and Mike approached the monstrous silhouette, their lights carving through the murk to reveal the clean, unnatural entry cut. The cold seeped through their suits as they hovered before the gaping maw, the pressure of the deep pressing in. Then, from within the blackness, a faint, sticky scraping noise began. Like metal on bone, an unnatural silence had fallen. The ship's usual chorus of groaning metal was gone. Inside, the K-114 no longer felt like a vessel of steel and rivets. It felt hollow, vast, and impossibly still. It felt less like a ship, and more like a desecrated cathedral. The sub's interior was a dark, drowned cathedral of forgotten steel. A metallic scent of ozone and rust hung thick in the frigid, stagnant air. Every surface was coated in a fine, damp silt that clung to their gloves. In the absolute stillness, the only sound was the faint, rhythmic drip of water echoing through the hull. Michael's gloved hand brushed against a faded photograph pinned to the bulkhead. A grinning Soviet sailor frozen in time. Mike's voice crackled over the comms. Bit eerie, in it? Like they just stepped out for a smoke, Michael replied tersely. Stay sharp. The target compartment is 1 deck below. Through that hatch, they descended, the stale water tasting of iron and rot, their lights revealing the hatch below, slightly warped and sealed shut. As Michael passed through the opening, a deep, resonant boom shuddered through the ancient hull. A thick cloud of silt erupted, obscuring everything in a choking brown haze. It was the ship settling, a common sound in these wrecks. But this time, that familiar groan wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. On the monitor aboard the Marlin, Sarah's face drained of all color. The external feed revealed a slow, cascading avalanche of seabed sediment and debris sliding down the cliff face above them. It completely buried the entry cut and a large section of the hull in a choking, suffocating blanket of darkness. Sarah's voice cracked as she yelled into the comms, Michael! Mike! Seismic slide! The darkness swallowed Mike's light, leaving only Michael's beam flickering weakly in the oppressive black. A metallic scent, like ozone after lightning, hung thick in the stagnant air. Michael's breath hitched as he realized the corridor behind him had sealed shut. Do you copy? His voice echoed back at him, swallowed by the void where Mike had stood moments before. Michael lay unconscious, a thin ribbon of blood tracing from his temple where a falling pipe had struck. The hatch above was jammed shut, its frame twisted and sealed by the violent shift. In 60 seconds, his world had collapsed from an ocean to this claustrophobic chamber at the sea's floor. The air already carried the metallic tang of rust and the weight of regret, thick and suffocating. Michael tore a strip from his shirt and bound Mike's bleeding scalp, the fabric already damp with sweat and salt water. Again and again, he threw his weight against the hatch, his palms splitting open against the unyielding metal. A glance at his air gauge. 4 hours remained. Mike showed 3. The first 24 hours had been a lesson in physics. Cold, unfeeling, and absolute. The air grew thin and metallic as they conserved what remained, sharing Mike's tank after his own ran dry. Desperate for warmth in the crushing cold, they ignited a chemical flare, its harsh, acrid scent cutting through the damp. Its ghostly light flickered over Mike's still form. The only sound, the faint hiss of the flare and the drip of icy water. But Mike didn't wake up. Michael slumped against the damp concrete wall, Sarah's voice crackling through the static-filled comms. The metallic tang of ozone and rust filled the cramped space where he was trapped. Her strained words reached him through the interference. "We're drilling, Michael. It's slow." Each second stretched into an eternity as he waited, the distant mechanical groans of their rescue attempt echoing through the walls. "Keep talking." But in a tomb, what words can you possibly find? You start speaking to the only other souls present. His torchlight drifts, and in the oppressive quiet, his mind begins to populate the darkness with them. Dimitri, the young sailor, hunched over the worn desk, his pen scratching against the paper as he composed a letter home. Across the cramped quarters, the cook tended to a pot of thin soup, simmering on a small, sputtering hot plate. The metallic scent of the broth mingled with the pervasive, briny dampness of the ship's interior. In that ordinary moment, Dimitri gave them names, a small anchor against the vast, consuming silence of the sea. Michael's whisper cut through the stillness. "Must have been colder than this, Alexei." Day 3 arrived with a terrible quiet. Then Mike's breathing simply stopped. The hush that followed was profound, a void deeper than the ocean's murmur. Now, Michael was truly alone. Or was he? The air grew thick with a metallic tang as shadows detached from the walls. A low, wet scratching sound echoed from the pipes overhead, while the damp chill of the concrete seeped through his clothes. His breath hitched, each inhaled tasting of rust and decay, as the creeping dread of isolation tightened around his chest. In the stillness, the whispers began, not from the shadows, but from the very air itself. Russian whispers seeped through the hull, accompanied by the distant clang of hatches echoing through the metal corridors. He began rationing his final food bar, debating escape routes with Dimitri, and arguing with Alexei over dwindling air reserves. His mind, fraying at the edges, started blurring reality to preserve his sanity. The past crew of the K-114 weren't haunting him. They had become his own. The mission was his alone now. The ship's dead reactor hummed a mechanical lullaby, its vibrations seeping into the hull. The pressure didn't crush. It cradled, holding his fractured psyche together. A metallic scent, like ozone and rust, clung to the recycled air. The cold seeped through his suit, not sharp, but a deep, marrow-chilling dampness. In the stillness, a new sound emerged. A faint, rhythmic scratching, like claws on metal, echoing from a sealed hatch down the corridor. His breath hitched. The serenity was not peace. It was the quiet of a tomb, and he was its sole, unwilling occupant. By the 5th day, the man known as Michael Thorne had vanished completely. In his place stood Acting Petty Officer Thorne of the Soviet Navy, meticulously serving a portion of water to an empty seat, before snapping a sharp salute toward the sealed hatch. He stood a solitary watch over his fallen comrades, awaiting orders from a command that had been silent for 3 decades. Then, a blinding, searing light erupted violently through a new, jagged tear in the steel hull. The rescue divers flooded the control room, their lights revealing a gaunt figure draped in a Soviet naval jacket salvaged from a locker. Michael sat motionless at the periscope, his hands resting on controls sealed shut by a thick, briny crust. The air carried the metallic tang of rust and the faint, sweet decay of forgotten things. Through his rebreather, a diver's voice cut the stagnant quiet, a strained whisper of horror. "Michael? We're here, mate." The crew celebrated their miracle survivor, but Michael remained apart, wrapped in a foil blanket, staring vacantly at the dark sea. He didn't acknowledge Sarah or anyone else, just hummed a low, tuneless melody that carried on the salt air. When he finally turned, his eyes held a wide, unsettling calm. "It's over," he murmured. Then, his voice flat and detached. "The captain says you are late for the watch rotation." But the man who emerged from the depths was no longer the man who descended. While his body was retrieved from the abyss, his mind had struck a different, more terrible bargain. The air in the room now carried the faint, acrid tang of ozone and something older, like damp earth and rust. He stood motionless, a vessel saved from drowning, now filled with a silence more profound than the dark he had left behind. In a quiet, sun-dappled garden, elderly Michael sat motionless in his chair. He was physically comfortable, yet his spirit seemed anchored somewhere far beyond the manicured hedges. When Sarah visited, her gentle hand on his shoulder failed to bridge the chasm. The air carried the faint, sweet scent of blooming flowers, but beneath it lingered the dry, sterile smell of forgotten memories. Michael's gaze held hers for just a moment, a flicker of recognition, before drifting past her toward the nearby pond. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "The water's calm today, Michael." He didn't look back, his voice a flat murmur. "Yes, good depth, no currents, a fine place to rest." The screen tightened on his eyes. A chilling vacancy where emotion should have been. They mirror the sky, yet harbor a profound, unnerving stillness. He never attempted escape again, for in his mind he had never truly departed. So the next time you gaze upon that calm, placid expanse, remember Michael Thorne. Remember that some wrecks are not forged from metal. Some graveyards refuse to remain buried. The most terrifying prison isn't made of stone or steel. It's the cage the mind constructs for itself, then throws away the key forever.
If the signal hooked you, subscribe and catch the next ripple.